The dust hung in the air like a golden veil as the train whistled into Clearwater Springs station, the sound cutting through the afternoon heat like a knife. Rachel Adams clutched her handkerchief tightly as she stepped down onto the wooden platform, her legs unsteady beneath her. The long journey from Boston had taken its toll, and the news waiting for her in this frontier town threatened to crush what little strength she had left. Her vision blurred, the faces of strangers swimming before her as she felt her knees begin to buckle. "Whoa there, miss," a deep voice rumbled beside her as strong hands gently caught her elbow. "I won't let you fall again." Rachel turned to find herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a worn Stetson. The man steadying her was tall and broad-shouldered, his manner confident but gentle as he guided her to a nearby bench. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid the journey has been rather taxing." "Owen Xavier," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. "Looks to me like you could use some water and a moment's rest." It was April 1878, and Rachel Adams had come to Wyoming territory with nothing but a letter informing her of her brother's death and the deed to a ranch she knew nothing about managing. What she didn't know was that Owen Xavier, the cowboy who just kept her from collapsing in front of the entire town, was about to change her life forever. "I didn't think the territory would be quite so overwhelming," Rachel admitted, accepting the canteen he offered. The water was cool against her parched throat. Owen studied her carefully, taking in her city clothes and delicate features. "First time out west," Rachel nodded, returning his canteen. "I've come to claim my brother's property, Robert Adams. He passed away last month." Recognition flickered in Owen's eyes. "The Double-A Ranch, I knew Robert. Good man." He paused, weighing his next words. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Adams." "Thank you." Rachel pressed her handkerchief to her lips, fighting back tears. "I'm afraid I know nothing about ranching." "The lawyer's letter said Robert left everything to me, but you look like you might faint again," Owen interrupted, his concern evident. "Let me help you to the hotel. We can talk more once you've rested." As Rachel looked up at him, something passed between them, a connection, fleeting but undeniable. She had no reason to trust this stranger, yet something told her she could. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Xavier." Owen helped her stand, steadying her with a gentle hand. "Just Owen, madam." "We don't stand on ceremony much out here." Rachel gathered her courage along with her small travel bag. "Then you must call me Rachel." As they walked slowly down the dusty main street, Rachel couldn't help but wonder what fate had brought her to this wild place and what might lie ahead. The cowboy beside her moved with the easy confidence of a man at home in this harsh landscape, so different from the gentleman she knew in Boston. She had come west expecting only to settle her brother's affairs and return home as quickly as possible. But already something was shifting inside her, a whisper of possibility she hadn't anticipated. The Clearwater Springs Hotel was modest by Eastern standards, but clean and respectable. Owen escorted her to the front desk where a balding man with spectacles greeted them. "Afternoon, miss. Need a room, I take it?" The clerk's eyes darted curiously between Rachel and Owen. "Yes, please," Rachel replied, reaching for her reticule. "Just for myself." "Put it on my tab, Henry," Owen said. "Miss Adams is Robert Adams' sister." The clerk's expression softened immediately. "Oh, my condolences, Miss Adams. Robert was well liked round here." "Thank you," Rachel murmured, feeling overwhelmed again by the reminder of her loss. "That's kind of you to say." "I can't accept your charity, Mr. Xavier Owen," she protested once the clerk had gone to fetch her key. Owen shook his head. "It's not charity. Consider it a debt owed to your brother. He helped me once when I needed it. I'm just returning the favor." Before Rachel could respond, Henry returned with a key. "Room 204, Miss Adams. Up the stairs, second door on the right. Sally will bring up some hot water for washing." "Thank you." Rachel turned to Owen, suddenly reluctant to part from the only person she'd met in this strange town. "Mr. Xavier, I don't know how to thank you for your assistance." "No need," he said, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Get some rest. I'll come by tomorrow morning, help you sort out what needs doing at the ranch if you'd like." Relief washed over her. I would be most grateful. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Rachel felt Owen's eyes following her. Despite her exhaustion and grief, a curious warmth spread through her chest. The West was nothing like she had imagined, and this cowboy with the gentle hands and watchful eyes was the biggest surprise of all. Rachel woke before dawn, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see the familiar wallpaper of her Boston bedroom. Reality crashed back as she remembered Robert was dead, and she was alone in a frontier town with nothing but a ranch she didn't know how to manage and a stranger's offer of help. She rose and dressed carefully in her simplest traveling outfit, a navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist. Her wardrobe, she realized with dismay, was entirely unsuitable for ranch life. After pinning her chestnut hair into a simple knot, she went downstairs to find breakfast. The hotel dining room was nearly empty at this early hour, save for a gray-haired woman serving coffee and a lone figure seated near the window. Owen Xavier looked up as she entered, rising to his feet. "Good morning," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," Rachel replied, taking the offered seat. "You're up early." "Sun comes up, so do I," Owen said with a slight smile. "Habit of a lifetime." The woman brought coffee for Rachel without being asked. "Breakfast will be eggs and biscuits, miss. That suit you?" "Yes, thank you," Rachel said, warming her hands around the mug. Once they were alone again, she studied Owen more carefully in the morning light. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun. His hands were calloused, his forearms tanned and strong where his shirt sleeves were rolled up. "Tell me about my brother's ranch," she said, needing to focus on the task ahead rather than the unsettling awareness of the man across from her. Owen leaned back in his chair. "The Double is about 10 miles outside of town. Good water rights, decent grazing land. Robert ran about 500 head of cattle, employed 6 hands full-time. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's solid." "And now it's mine," Rachel said, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, "though I haven't the faintest idea what to do with it." "What were your plans when you came out here?" Owen asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. Rachel sighed. "To sell it, I suppose, return to Boston." "I have a life there, friends, charitable committees, a position teaching music at a girls' school." Something flickered across Owen's face, disappointment, resignation. "That would be the sensible thing, I guess." Their breakfast arrived, interrupting the conversation. As they ate, Rachel found herself curious about the man across from her. "What about you, Mr. Xavier? What brings you to Clearwater Springs?" A shadow passed over his features. "Been here about 5 years. I ranch a small spread that borders the AA, nothing fancy, but it's mine." "You came from Texas originally?" His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. "After the war, I drifted north, worked as a trail hand, saved up to buy my own place." Rachel wanted to ask which side he'd fought for in the war, but thought better of it. Such questions could still open old wounds, even 13 years after Appomattox. "Well, I appreciate your help," she said instead. "I should at least see the ranch before making any decisions." Owen nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "I brought the wagon. We can head out whenever you're ready." An hour later, they were jolting along a rutted dirt road, the town falling away behind them. The landscape opened up before Rachel, rolling hills covered in sage and grass, the distant mountains etched against the impossibly blue sky. Despite her grief and uncertainty, she couldn't help but be moved by the wild beauty surrounding them. "It's breathtaking," she murmured, more to herself than to Owen. He glanced at her, something softening in his expression. "It gets in your blood, that's what Robert always said." The mention of her brother brought a fresh wave of sorrow. "How did he die?" The letter didn't say, only that it was sudden. Owen's hands tightened on the reins. "Caught pneumonia after a spring blizzard. He was out looking for strays, got caught in the storm. By the time he made it home, the fever had already taken hold. Doc Simmons did what he could, but..." He trailed off, then added quietly, "He didn't suffer long." Rachel blinked back tears. "Thank you for telling me. Were you friends, neighbors, partners sometimes when we needed extra hands?" He was a good man, fair in his dealings. Owen hesitated. The hands at the AA, they've been keeping things running since he passed, but they'll be wanting to know what comes next. Of course, Rachel said, feeling overwhelmed again. I'll need to meet with them. The wagon crested a hill and Owen pulled the horses to a stop. There it is, the AA. Below them stretched a valley with a creek winding through it. Near the water stood a substantial log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Cattle dotted the hillsides, tiny dark shapes against the green grass. It's larger than I expected, Rachel said, trying to imagine her refined brother living in such a place. Robert built it up from almost nothing, Owen said, pride evident in his voice. He had vision, your brother. They continued down the hill, and as they approached the ranch house, several men emerged from the barn. They watched the wagon with wary expressions that changed to curiosity as they recognized Owen. That's Hank Miller, your foreman, Owen said, nodding toward a weathered man in his 40s. The others are Chuck, Liam, and Diego. 2 more hands, Pete and Jasper, are probably out checking the north pasture. Rachel straightened her spine, determined to show these men she wasn't a helpless city woman, even if she felt like one. As Owen helped her down from the wagon, she met Hank's appraising gaze steadily. Miss Adams, he said, removing his hat, we've been expecting you. Sorry about your brother. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I appreciate you and the men keeping things running in my absence. Hank nodded, clearly uncertain how to proceed. You'll be wanting to see the house, I expect. Mrs. Holloway's been keeping it up. She comes in from town 3 times a week. Yes, I'd like that very much, Rachel said, glancing at Owen, who gave her an encouraging nod. The inside of the ranch house surprised her. While the exterior was rustic, the interior revealed Robert's Eastern upbringing. The furniture was solid and well made, the floors covered with colorful woven rugs. Bookshelves lined one wall of the main room, filled with volumes she recognized from their childhood home. He made a real home here, she said softly as she trailed her fingers over the spines of the books. Yeah, he did, Hank agreed, standing awkwardly by the door. Kitchens through there, bedrooms down that hall, got a nice office where he kept the ranch accounts. Rachel turned to face the foreman. Mr. Miller, I won't pretend to know anything about running a ranch. But I do want to understand what my brother built here before I make any decisions about its future. Relief crossed the older man's face. Glad to hear it, miss. The boys were worried you'd sell straight off to the Harrington outfit. They've been trying to buy up all the small spreads in the valley. I see, Rachel said, filing away this information. Well, I can promise you I won't make any hasty decisions. After Hank excused himself, Rachel explored the house alone, touching her brother's possessions, trying to reconcile this life with the brother she remembered. In his bedroom, she found a framed photograph of their parents on the dresser and a Bible on the nightstand. The office was meticulously organized, ledgers neatly labeled by year. She was studying these when a knock at the open door made her look up. Owen stood there, hat in hand. The men are wondering if you'd like to see the rest of the place, he said. Yes, of course. Rachel set down the ledger she'd been examining. Mr. Xavier, Owen, he corrected gently. Owen, did you know about these Harrington people trying to buy the ranch? His expression darkened. James Harrington owns the biggest spread in the county. Been buying up land for years, not always by honest means. He made your brother offers, but Robert wouldn't sell. Do you think that's why the lawyer suggested I might want to sell quickly? He mentioned a buyer was already interested. Wouldn't surprise me. Harrington has the bank president in his pocket, along with half the town council. Owen's voice held a controlled anger. If you do decide to sell, Miss Adams, I'd ask you to consider other options first. Please call me Rachel, she said, moved by his obvious concern. And I promise you, I won't make any decision without understanding all the facts. Their eyes met, and again she felt that strange connection, as if they'd known each other far longer than a day. Owen was the first to look away, clearing his throat. Hank's waiting to show you the barn, he said. I should check in with my own hands, make sure everything's running smooth. Would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? There's some things about the water rights and grazing boundaries you should know. I would appreciate that very much, Rachel said, surprised by how reluctant she was to see him go. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of introductions and information. Hank proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the basics of the ranch operation without condescension. By evening, Rachel's head was spinning with new terminology and facts about cattle breeding, water management, and market prices. Mrs. Holloway, a plump widow who came to cook and clean, prepared a hearty dinner and showed Rachel where everything was kept in the kitchen. When Rachel finally retired to her brother's bedroom, now hers, she supposed she was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were not of Boston or her life there, but of blue eyes and a gentle voice saying, "I won't let you fall again." The next week passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Owen returned the following day and the day after that. He seemed to have appointed himself her unofficial guide to ranch life, explaining things the hands took for granted and helping her understand the decisions that needed to be made. Rachel discovered she had an aptitude for bookkeeping, spending evenings going through Robert's meticulous records. The ranch was profitable, more so than she'd expected, though there were notes in the margins about Harrington's attempts to divert water from the creek that served both properties. "He's been trying to force the smaller ranchers out," Owen explained as they rode along the property line one afternoon. "Cuts off their water, their cattle die or they have to sell cheap. Then he swoops in and buys the land for a fraction of what it's worth." Rachel, still unsteady on horseback but improving daily, frowned. "That's deplorable. Surely there are laws against such tactics." Owen's laugh was without humor. "Law out here favors those with money and guns, Rachel. Your brother understood that. It's why he made alliances with neighbors like me. We watch out for each other." The casual use of her given name no longer startled her. Somewhere in the past week, their relationship had shifted from wary acquaintances to something approaching friendship. She found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his deep voice explaining the workings of the ranch, to the rare moments when he allowed himself to smile. On this particular day, they had ridden to the furthest corner of the AA, where a natural spring bubbled up from the ground, creating a small oasis of willows and cottonwoods. "It's beautiful," Rachel said as they dismounted to let the horses drink. "Robert never mentioned any of this in his letters. Some things are hard to put into words," Owen replied, leaning against a tree trunk. "Beauty like this, you have to see it for yourself." Rachel removed her hat, enjoying the feel of the breeze on her face. The past week had already darkened her complexion more than considered fashionable in Boston, but she found she didn't care. There was something liberating about this place, about the work that filled her days and the simplicity of life on the ranch. "I received a letter from my friend Alina yesterday," she said, watching a hawk circle overhead. "She thinks I've gone quite mad staying here even this long. She says Boston society is abuzz with speculation about my frontier adventure." Owen studied her face. "And what do you think?" "Is Alina right? Are you mad to stay?" Rachel met his gaze. "I don't know. A part of me feels I should return to the life I know, but then—" She gestured to the landscape around them. "Then I see this and I understand why Robert chose to stay." "It's not an easy life," Owen said, his voice low. "Winter storms that can kill a man in hours, drought that can destroy everything you've worked for, rustlers, predators, disease, all things that can wipe out a herd in weeks. You're not making a very compelling case for ranching, Mr. Xavier," Rachel said with a small smile. His answering smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry. "Just want you to know what you'd be getting into if you decide to stay." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Rachel found herself noticing the way the sunlight brought out gold flecks in his blue eyes, the strong line of his jaw beneath his short beard, the breadth of his shoulders in his worn shirt. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a gunshot. Owen straightened immediately, all trace of softness vanishing from his expression. "That came from the north pasture," he said, already moving toward his horse. "Get back to the house. Take the creek trail, it's faster." "I'm coming with you," Rachel said, picking up her hat. "Rachel, it's my ranch, Owen, my responsibility." She mounted her horse with more confidence than she felt. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Stay behind me, then." They rode hard along the creek, following it downstream toward the northern boundary of the ranch. As they approached a bend where the water widened into a pool, Owen held up his hand, signaling her to stop. Ahead, 3 riders were driving a small group of cattle across the creek onto land that Rachel recognized as part of the AA. "Harrington's men," Owen said quietly, drawing his rifle from its scabbard, moving the boundary markers again. "What do we do?" Rachel whispered, heart pounding. "We remind them where the property line is." He glanced at her. "Stay here. If shooting starts, ride for the house." Before she could protest, he urged his horse forward into the open, rifle resting casually across his saddle. "Afternoon, boys," he called, his voice carrying across the water. "Think you got turned around? Those are double a cattle you're pushing." The 3 men stopped, clearly surprised. One, a burly man with a red bandana, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Xavier, this ain't your concern." "Miss Adams says different," Owen replied evenly. "She's taken over the AA and she doesn't take kindly to rustling." The men exchanged glances, noticing Rachel for the first time as she moved her horse into view, despite Owen's instructions. "Harrington says this water belongs to him now," said another rider, younger and more nervous looking. "Says Adams ain't around to dispute it." "Mr. Harrington is mistaken," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The AA's water rights are well documented, as I'm sure the territorial court would confirm." The mention of court seemed to unsettle the men. The leader scowled. "Harrington ain't gonna like this." "Mr. Harrington is welcome to call on me at the ranch if he has concerns," Rachel said, channeling her best Boston drawing room manner. "In the meantime, I'll thank you to return those cattle to double a land." For a tense moment, she thought the men might refuse. Then the leader jerked his head at his companions. "Let him go. Ain't worth getting shot over." As the cattle ambled back across the creek, Owen kept his rifle ready, his eyes never leaving the 3 riders. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did he relax. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said to Rachel, but there was admiration in his voice. "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "Will they be back? Not today, but Harrington won't give up so easily." Owen's expression was troubled. "He'll try other tactics. Then we'll be ready," Rachel said with more confidence than she felt. "I won't let him intimidate me into selling." Owen looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're not what I expected, Rachel Adams. Is that a compliment, Mr. Xavier?" His slow smile made her heart skip. "Yes, madam, I believe it is." As they rode back to the ranch house, Rachel realized something had changed. She was no longer thinking of the double as merely her brother's legacy, something to be settled before returning to her real life. Somehow, in just a week, it had started to feel like home. That night, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rachel wrote a letter to the headmistress of her school in Boston, requesting an extended leave of absence. It was time to acknowledge what she had been feeling since that first day at the depot. The West was claiming her heart, one sunset at a time. The following Sunday, Rachel attended services at Clearwater Springs' small white church. As the newest resident and a single woman from the East, no less she drew considerable attention. After the service, Reverend Thompson introduced her to several families, including the Wilsons, whose daughter Sarah immediately invited Rachel to join the ladies' quilting circle. "We meet on Wednesday afternoons at the church," Sarah explained, her friendly manner putting Rachel at ease. "Nothing fancy, but it's a chance to socialize a bit. Life can get mighty lonely on the ranches." "I'd like that very much," Rachel said, realizing she had spoken to almost no one but the ranch hands and Owen in the past week. "Wonderful. Oh, and we're having a social next Saturday, dancing, food, music. The whole county comes. You'll come too, won't you?" Before Rachel could respond, a shadow fell across them. She turned to find herself face to face with a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, expensively dressed and flanked by 2 younger men. "Miss Adams, I presume," he said, his smile not reaching his cold gray eyes. "James Harrington." I've been hoping to make your acquaintance. Rachel felt a chill despite the warm spring day. Mr. Harrington, she acknowledged with a nod. My condolences on your brother's passing, he said smoothly. Robert was a determined man. Thank you, Rachel replied, keeping her expression neutral. He was indeed. Harrington glanced at Sarah, who murmured an excuse and moved away. I understand you've been getting acquainted with your brother's property, he continued. It must be quite overwhelming for a lady accustomed to city comforts. I'm adapting well, thank you, Rachel said, maintaining her composure despite the condescension in his tone. Of course, of course. Harrington's smile widened. Still, ranching is a difficult business, especially for someone without experience. I'd be remiss if I didn't offer my assistance. In fact, I'd be happy to take the burden off your hands entirely for a fair price, naturally. That's very generous, Mr. Harrington, but I have no intention of selling at present. A flash of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it with another smile. I admire your spirit, Miss Adams, but the West can be dangerous for a woman alone. Accidents happen, cattle stray, fires start. He paused, letting the implications sink in. My offer stands. When you're ready to be sensible, you know where to find me. With a tip of his hat, he moved on, leaving Rachel shaken by the thinly veiled threat. She was still standing there when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Don't let him intimidate you. Rachel turned to find Owen, dressed in a clean shirt and vest that made him look almost like a different person. I'm trying not to, she said quietly, but he was rather explicit in his warnings. Owen's jaw tightened. Harrington thinks he owns this valley. He's not used to being denied. Yet my brother denied him, it seems. Robert was stubborn, Owen said with a hint of a smile. Runs in the family, I'm noticing. Despite her unease, Rachel found herself smiling back. Perhaps it does. They walked together toward where Owen had tied his horse. I didn't know you attended church services, Mr. Xavier, she said. Don't usually, he admitted. But I figured you might be here, and after yesterday's encounter with Harrington's men, I wanted to make sure you were all right. The concern in his voice warmed her. That's very kind of you. Not kindness, he said, looking away, just being neighborly. Rachel wasn't convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Sarah Wilson invited me to a social next Saturday, a dance of some kind, the spring social, whole county turns out for it. Will you be there? She asked, hoping she sounded merely curious rather than eager. Owen hesitated. Not much for dancing. Oh, Rachel tried to hide her disappointment. Well, I suppose I should attend, if only to meet more of the community. Something shifted in Owen's expression. Might stop by. Just to keep an eye out, Harrington will be there and after today. I would feel safer knowing you were nearby, Rachel admitted. Their eyes met, and for a moment the busy churchyard seemed to fade away. Then someone called Owen's name, breaking the spell. Mr. Xavier. A word, if you please. Reverend Thompson was waving from the church steps. Duty calls, Owen said with a rueful smile. I'll ride out to check the north pasture again tomorrow, make sure Harrington's men haven't returned. Thank you, Owen, Rachel said softly, for everything. As she watched him walk away, Rachel acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was developing feelings for the taciturn rancher. Feelings that went beyond gratitude or friendship. Feelings that complicated an already complex situation. She had come to Wyoming planning to stay only long enough to settle her brother's affairs. Now, less than 2 weeks later, she found herself reluctant to leave, not just because of the ranch and the unexpected sense of purpose it gave her, but because of the man who had been by her side since that first moment at the depot. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. What future could there be for them? She was still a Boston music teacher at heart, unused to the harsh realities of frontier life. And Owen. Owen was as much a part of this wild landscape as the sagebrush and the mountains. Could two such different worlds ever truly meet? As Rachel made her way back to the waiting wagon that would take her to the ranch, she resolved to guard her heart more carefully. The last thing she needed was to fall in love with a cowboy who saw her as nothing more than his neighbor's helpless eastern sister. The week leading up to the social was busy with ranch work. A late spring storm brought much-needed rain, but also meant long hours for the hands moving cattle to higher ground as the creek rose. Rachel threw herself into learning every aspect of ranch operations, riding out with Hank despite the weather, helping Mrs. Holloway preserve early vegetables from the kitchen garden, and continuing to study Robert's meticulous ledgers. Owen came by several times, ostensibly to check on the creek levels and the northern boundary, but he always found time to share a cup of coffee with Rachel on the porch or offer advice on ranch matters. With each visit, Rachel found it harder to maintain the emotional distance she had promised herself. By Saturday, the storm had cleared, leaving behind a washed, clean sky and meadows bright with wildflowers. Mrs. Holloway helped Rachel choose her most appropriate dress for the social, a lavender gown with modest lace trim that had been packed for formal occasions. "You look lovely, Miss Adams," the older woman said as she helped pin Rachel's hair. "You'll be the belle of the social, mark my words." Rachel blushed. "I doubt that, Mrs. Holloway. I'm sure the local young ladies will outshine a plain Easterner like me," Mrs. Holloway snorted. "Nothing plain about you, miss, and if you don't mind my saying, there's a certain gentleman who seems to think so too." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Rachel said, though her flush deepened. "Don't you?" Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled. "Mr. Xavier has been finding more reasons to visit this ranch in the past 2 weeks than in all the years your brother was alive." Rachel busied herself with her gloves. "Mr. Xavier has been very helpful during this transition. I'm grateful for his assistance." Mrs. Holloway said, clearly unconvinced. "Well, gratitude or no, you'll turn heads tonight." The social was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that served as courthouse, meeting place, and occasional dance hall. By the time Rachel arrived with Hank and his wife as her escorts, the celebration was in full swing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, and tables laden with food lined the walls. Sarah Wilson spotted her immediately and hurried over to make introductions. Soon Rachel found herself surrounded by curious neighbors, all eager to meet Robert Adams' sister from the east. "Is it true you're staying on to run the Double A?" asked Frank Wilson, Sarah's father and the town's general store owner. "I haven't made any final decisions," Rachel said diplomatically, "but I'm learning as much as I can about ranching while I'm here." "Good for you," said Mrs. Wilson approvingly. "This valley needs more women with backbone." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Harrington and his entourage. The rancher made a show of greeting important townspeople, his booming voice carrying across the hall. When he spotted Rachel, he made his way toward her, a tall young man in tow. "Miss Adams, a pleasure to see you again," Harrington said with his practiced smile. "May I present my son, William? He's recently returned from university back east." William Harrington was handsome in a polished way with his father's height but softer features. He bowed slightly. "Miss Adams." "Father has spoken highly of you." "Has he?" Rachel said, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. "How surprising." William had the grace to look embarrassed while his father's smile tightened. "William, why don't you ask Miss Adams to dance?" "I'm sure she'd welcome a partner who understands Eastern refinements." Before Rachel could form a polite refusal, the band struck up a waltz, and William offered his arm. Seeing no graceful way to decline, she allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. William proved to be a competent dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "I apologize for my father's heavy-handedness," he said quietly. "He tends to view people as pieces on a chessboard." Surprised by his candor, Rachel studied his face. Including his son, William's smile was rueful. "Especially his son. Harvard Law was his choice, not mine. And what would have been your choice?" "Architecture," he admitted. "I have notebooks full of building designs, but father has other plans for the Harrington legacy." Rachel found herself warming to the young man despite her reservations about his family. "It's never too late to follow your own path, Mr. Harrington. Perhaps not for someone brave enough to take on a cattle ranch with no experience," he replied with admiration. "I've heard about your confrontation with our men. Not many would have shown such courage." Rachel was formulating a response when she caught sight of Owen entering the hall. He stood near the door, hat in hand, scanning the crowd until his eyes found her in William Harrington's arms. Even across the room, she could see his expression darken. "Your neighbor doesn't appear pleased to see us dancing," William observed, following her gaze. "Mr. Xavier has been very helpful to me since my arrival," Rachel said, feeling strangely defensive. "I'm sure he has." Something knowing entered William's tone. Xavier is a good man by all accounts. Father would never admit it, but he respects him, even as he tries to drive him off his land. The music ended, and William escorted her back to the edge of the dance floor. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Adams. And for the conversation. It's refreshing to speak with someone who doesn't have an angle." "Everyone has an angle, Mr. Harrington," Rachel replied with a small smile. "Even me," he laughed, a genuine sound that drew glances from nearby dancers. "Then I look forward to discovering yours." "May I call on you sometime, just to talk?" he added quickly. No chess pieces involved. Before Rachel could answer, a deep voice interrupted. "Mind if I cut in?" Owen stood beside them, his expression carefully neutral. William raised an eyebrow but stepped back with good grace. "Of course, Xavier, Miss Adams, it's been a pleasure." As William walked away, Owen's gaze followed him. "Didn't take Harrington long to send in his son." "He seems different from his father," Rachel said, studying Owen's face. "Less calculating." "Don't be fooled," Owen warned. "The Harringtons stick together, whatever their differences." The band began another tune, slower this time. Owen hesitated, then held out his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Adams?" The formality made her smile. "I thought you weren't much for dancing, Mr. Xavier." "I make exceptions," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. As Owen led her onto the dance floor, Rachel was acutely aware of the whispers and glances following them. Owen Xavier rarely attended social functions, and he certainly never danced. Their partnership was causing quite a stir. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured as his hand settled respectfully at her waist. "Let them," he replied, his voice low. "Gives them something to talk about besides cattle prices." Despite his claim of not being a dancer, Owen moved with natural grace, guiding her confidently through the steps. Rachel found herself relaxing into his hold, enjoying the solid strength of his arms around her. "You dance very well for someone who professes not to enjoy it," she observed. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said it was a civilized skill even for boys destined for ranch life." "You have brothers." Rachel realized how little she knew about his past. "Had," he corrected, his expression shuddering slightly. "Two, both gone now." "I'm sorry," Rachel said softly, understanding the pain of losing siblings. Owen nodded, accepting her sympathy without elaboration. They danced in companionable silence for a few moments before he spoke again. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, the words coming out in a rush as if he'd been holding them back. "That color suits you." Rachel felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself," and he did. Though not dressed as formally as some of the townsmen, Owen's clean black trousers, white shirt, and dark vest highlighted his tall, muscular frame. He'd trimmed his beard as well, revealing more of the strong line of his jaw. As the music swelled, Owen drew her slightly closer, his hand warm against the small of her back. Rachel's heart quickened at the nearness of him, at the scent of soap and leather that seemed uniquely his. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Yes." Rachel looked up, caught by the intensity in his blue eyes. "The spring roundup starts next week. We'll be moving cattle to summer pasture, branding the new calves. It's all hands on deck, usually." I wondered if he was interrupted by a commotion near the refreshment table. Raised voices cut through the music, which faltered and stopped. Owen's arm tightened protectively around Rachel as they turned to see what was happening. James Harrington stood toe-to-toe with a ranch hand Rachel recognized as Pete, one of her own employees. Both men were red-faced with anger. "You're a liar, Harrington," Pete shouted, jabbing a finger at the older man's chest. "You know damn well that water's always belonged to the AA." Harrington's voice was cold. Watch yourself, boy. You're talking to the man who'll own that land before summer's end. Rachel felt Owen stiffen beside her. Without a word, he guided her through the crowd toward the confrontation, positioning himself between her and the angry men. "What's this about?" he demanded, his quiet authority drawing attention. Pete turned, relief crossing his face when he saw Owen. "Xavier, this snake's been telling folks the double A's going under that Miss Adams is selling out." All eyes turned to Rachel, who stepped forward, chin raised. "That is absolutely false, Mr. Harrington. As I told you at church, I have no intention of selling the double A." Harrington's smile was reptilian. "Not yet, perhaps, but we both know a refined lady like yourself isn't cut out for the brutal realities of ranch life. It's only a matter of time." "You underestimate me, sir," Rachel replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And you underestimate the loyalty of the double A hands." "Loyalty," Harrington scoffed. "Loyalty won't save you when drought comes, or when rustlers hit your herd, or when winter storms kill half your cattle. This isn't Boston, Miss Adams. The West breaks even the strongest men. What chance does a woman have?" Before Rachel could respond, Owen moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "She has friends, Harrington, neighbors who remember what it means to help each other." "Touching," Harrington sneered. "The failed Texas rancher defending the Eastern spinster. What a pair you make." Owen's hands clenched into fists, but Rachel laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice carrying in the now silent hall, "you seem very concerned about my welfare. Let me ease your mind. The double is not for sale, not now, not ever. My brother built something meaningful here, and I intend to honor his legacy by continuing his work." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Even William Harrington, standing behind his father, looked impressed. "Furthermore," Rachel continued, gaining confidence, "I find your methods of persuasion distasteful. If you or your men trespass on double A land again or interfere with our water rights, I will take the matter to the territorial court. I understand Judge Halloran is a fair-minded man who respects property law." Harrington's face darkened with anger, but he was too shrewd to make a scene in front of the entire community. "You've made your position clear, Miss Adams. I hope, for your sake, you don't come to regret it." With that, he stalked toward the exit, gesturing for his entourage to follow. William hesitated, giving Rachel an apologetic look before hurrying after his father. As the door slammed behind them, the tension in the room broke. People began talking all at once. The band struck up again, and several men came forward to congratulate Rachel on standing up to Harrington. "That was quite a speech," Owen said when they finally had a moment alone near the punch bowl. "I think you just made some powerful enemies and some loyal friends." Rachel's hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. "I meant every word. I won't be bullied into selling, no matter what tactics he employs." Owen studied her face, something like wonder in his expression. "You really are staying, aren't you?" "I'm beginning to think I am," Rachel admitted. "The double A feels more like home every day." His eyes softened. "I'm glad to hear it." Before Rachel could respond, Sarah Wilson appeared at her elbow. "Rachel, everyone's talking about how you stood up to Harrington. It was magnificent." As Sarah pulled her away to meet more admirers, Rachel glanced back at Owen. He remained where she'd left him, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip a beat, a mixture of pride, admiration, and something deeper that she dared not name. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Rachel danced with several local men, including the sheriff and the banker, both of whom assured her of their support against Harrington's machinations. But she didn't dance with Owen again, though she often felt his eyes on her as she moved around the room. It was well past midnight when Hank found her to say it was time to head back to the ranch. As they were collecting their wraps, Owen appeared at her side. "I'll ride alongside the wagon," he said to Hank. "Extra precaution after tonight." Hank nodded, understanding immediately. "Good thinking." Harrington didn't take that public dressing down well. Outside, the spring night was cool and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. As Hank helped his wife into the wagon, Owen drew Rachel slightly aside. About what I was going to ask before we were interrupted, he said, his voice low. The roundup. It's tradition for the ranch owner to ride with the men, at least for part of it. Your brother always did. Rachel felt a flutter of excitement mixed with trepidation. I'm hardly an experienced rider, Owen. You're better than you were 2 weeks ago, he pointed out. And you wouldn't have to do the hard work, just be there, let the men see you're committed to the ranch. And are you suggesting this because you think I should uphold my brother's tradition, or because you want to keep me away from William Harrington? Rachel asked, unable to resist teasing him a little. In the moonlight, she could see the corners of his mouth twitch. Maybe a bit of both. Rachel laughed softly. At least you're honest. Very well, Mr. Xavier, I accept your invitation to join the roundup. It won't be comfortable, he warned. Long days in the saddle, sleeping under the stars. I'm tougher than I look, Rachel replied, holding his gaze. As Mr. Harrington is discovering, Owen's smile broadened into something genuine and warm. That you are, Rachel Adams, that you are. As the wagon pulled away from the town hall, Rachel settled back against the seat, her mind full of the evening's events. She had publicly committed to staying in Wyoming, to running the AA, to becoming a part of this community that had welcomed her despite her Eastern ways. And she had done so partly because of the man riding beside them in the darkness, the cowboy who had caught her when she stumbled at the depot, who had shown her the beauty of this wild country, who looked at her as if she were something precious and surprising. Rachel knew she was falling for Owen Xavier. The question now was whether he might be falling for her too, and what they would do about it if he was. The spring roundup began 3 days later, with cowboys from neighboring ranches gathering at the double at dawn. Rachel, dressed in the split riding skirt Mrs. Holloway had hastily sewn for her and a borrowed flannel shirt, felt both nervous and exhilarated as she mounted the gentle mare Owen had selected for her. Remember what I taught you, he said, adjusting her stirrups. Move with the horse, not against her. If you get tired, don't push too hard. No shame in riding in the chuck wagon for a spell. Rachel nodded, touched by his concern. I'll be careful, but I want to do this properly, Owen. I want the men to see I'm serious about the ranch. His eyes softened. They already know that after the social. Word spread about how you stood up to Harrington. Before she could respond, Hank called for the riders to move out. The roundup had begun. The next 5 days were the most physically demanding of Rachel's life. They rode from sunrise to sunset, gathering scattered cattle from the winter range, moving them toward the summer pastures high in the foothills. The work was dusty, exhausting, and occasionally dangerous, but Rachel refused to complain. She watched and learned, asking questions when appropriate, but mostly observing the intricate dance of men and horses and cattle. She learned to recognize the signs of a cow about to bolt, to gauge the weather from the feel of the air, to appreciate the quiet moments around the campfire when the day's work was done. And always, Owen was nearby, offering guidance when needed, stepping back when she wanted to try something herself. The other hands treated her with a gruff respect that grew as they saw her determination to learn their ways. On the third night, as they sat around the fire after supper, Chuck pulled out a harmonica and began to play a haunting melody that carried on the night air. The men grew quiet, some closing their eyes, others staring into the flames as if seeing something far away. My brother used to play the piano, Rachel said softly to Owen, who sat beside her on a fallen log. This reminds me of him somehow. Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Music speaks to something deep in us, doesn't matter if it's a concert hall or a campfire. Yes, exactly. Rachel smiled, once again struck by the unexpected depth behind his quiet exterior. I taught music back in Boston, piano mostly. You miss it? Rachel considered the question seriously. I miss my students, the joy on their faces when they mastered a difficult piece. But I don't miss Boston society, the endless rounds of proper visits and correct behavior. Owen's mouth quirked upward, not much proper about roundup. Rachel laughed, gesturing to her dusty clothes and wind-tangled hair. Indeed not. Eleanor would faint dead away if she could see me now. I think you look perfect, Owen said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. In the firelight, Rachel could see a flush creep up his neck. That is, you look like you belong here." The simple sincerity of his compliment touched her more deeply than any flowery praise from a Boston suitor ever had. "Thank you, Owen. I'm beginning to feel like I do." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Rachel felt the now familiar flutter in her chest. Something was growing between them, something neither had put into words yet, but which seemed to strengthen with each passing day. The moment was broken when Jasper, one of the younger hands, called across the fire. "Miss Adams, Chuck says you know music. Would you sing something for us?" Rachel hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "Oh, I don't know. Please, miss," urged Pete. "Gets mighty lonely out here. A song would do us good." Touched by their request, Rachel nodded. "Very well, something simple, I think." As Chuck played a familiar tune on his harmonica, Rachel began to sing Barbara Allen, her clear soprano rising into the night. The cowboys listened in respectful silence, many removing their hats as the sad ballad unfolded. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet before the men broke into appreciative applause and calls for another song. Rachel obliged with Shenandoah and then Amazing Grace, which several of the hands joined in singing. As the impromptu concert ended and the men began to turn in for the night, Rachel caught Owen watching her with an expression that made her breath catch a mixture of admiration, longing, and something deeper that she dared not name. "You have a beautiful voice," he said quietly as he walked her to her bedroll, set slightly apart from the men's for propriety's sake. "Thank you," Rachel replied, suddenly shy. "It felt good to sing again. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it." They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, the stars wheeling overhead, the only sounds the soft nickering of horses and the crackling of the dying fire. "Good night, Rachel," Owen finally said, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. "Good night, Owen," she replied, reluctant to end the moment but aware of the eyes that might be watching from around the fire. "Thank you for encouraging me to come on the roundup. It's been illuminating." His smile was just visible in the starlight. "You're full of surprises, Rachel Adams." "Sleep well?" As Rachel settled into her bedroll, she gazed up at the vast canopy of stars, feeling both small beneath their eternal light and somehow part of something greater. The West was changing her, she realized. Or perhaps it was simply allowing her to become the person she had always been beneath the constraints of Eastern society. And Owen Xavier, with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, was at the heart of that transformation. The final day of the roundup dawned clear and cool. The cattle had been successfully moved to the summer pasture, the new calves branded with the double a mark, and now it was time to return to the ranch. Rachel rode beside Hank at the head of the small procession, aware of the subtle shift in the men's attitudes toward her. She was no longer just the boss's sister, or the Eastern lady. She had earned a place in their rough hierarchy through her willingness to work and learn. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, Rachel felt a surge of pride at the sight of the buildings nestled in the valley below. In just a few short weeks, this place had become home in a way Boston never had. "Riders coming," Hank said suddenly, pointing to 3 horsemen approaching from the direction of town. Owen moved his horse up beside Rachel's, his expression wary. "That's Sheriff Taylor in the middle." "Don't recognize the others." As the riders drew closer, Rachel could make out the sheriff's weathered face and the badges on all 3 men's chests. They reined in their horses as they met the roundup party. "Miss Adams," the sheriff greeted her, touching the brim of his hat. "Got someone here looking for you. Deputy Marshal Collins from Cheyenne." A lean, hard-faced man in a dusty black coat nodded to Rachel. "Madam, sorry to trouble you, but we've got some questions about your brother's death." Rachel felt a chill despite the warm spring sun. "My brother. I was told he died of pneumonia." The marshal exchanged glances with the sheriff. "That's what the doc thought at first, but some new information's come to light. We've reason to believe Robert Adams might have been poisoned." Gasps and mutters ran through the gathered cowboys. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "Poisoned, but who would?" "That's what we aim to find out, madam," the marshal said grimly. "Mind if we continue this conversation at your ranch? It's a delicate matter." Rachel nodded numbly, her mind reeling with the implications. As they rode down toward the ranch house, Owen stayed close beside her, his presence a silent comfort in the face of this shocking news. In the ranch house parlor, Rachel sat stiffly as Marshal Collins explained the situation. An anonymous letter had reached the territorial governor's office, claiming that Robert Adams had been deliberately poisoned to force the sale of his ranch. The symptoms initially attributed to pneumonia, difficulty breathing, bluish skin. Confusion could also indicate certain types of poison. "We've got a warrant to exhume your brother's body, Miss Adams," the marshal said, his tone gentler now. "With your permission, of course, the doc in Cheyenne can look for signs of arsenic or strychnine." Rachel pressed her handkerchief to her lips, fighting nausea at the thought. "And if you find he was murdered, what then?" "Then we investigate," Sheriff Taylor said firmly. "Starting with who stands to gain from Robert's death and the sale of the AA, all eyes in the room turned to the same conclusion: James Harrington." "You'll need more than suspicion to accuse a man like Harrington," Owen said, standing by the fireplace. "He's got friends in high places." "That's why we're proceeding carefully," the marshal agreed. "But if your brother was murdered, Miss Adams, we'll find who did it. You have my word." After the lawman departed with plans to return the next day, Rachel sat motionless in her chair, trying to process this new horror. Owen dismissed the curious hands who had gathered on the porch, then returned to kneel beside her chair. "Rachel," he said gently, taking her cold hands in his. "I'm so sorry." She looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Do you think it's true that Robert was murdered?" Owen's expression was grim. "I don't know, but it would explain why Harrington was so confident you'd sell. If he thought the double would be too much for you to handle alone. And when I refused to be intimidated, he grew desperate," Rachel finished, anger beginning to replace shock. "That's why he spread rumors at the social, why he's been so aggressive about the water rights." "It makes sense," Owen agreed, "but proving it will be another matter." Rachel squared her shoulders, a new resolve hardening within her. "Then we'll have to be smarter than him. If Robert was murdered, I won't rest until his killer faces justice." Owen's eyes searched her face. "This could get dangerous, Rachel. Harrington isn't a man to cross lightly." "I'm already in danger if he killed my brother," she pointed out, "and I refuse to be driven away by fear." A look of fierce pride crossed Owen's features. He rose, still holding her hands, drawing her gently to her feet. "Then you won't face it alone. Whatever comes, I'll be beside you." The intensity in his voice made Rachel's heart race. They stood close, their hands still linked, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. "Owen," she began, unsure what she wanted to say but needing to acknowledge the moment. Before she could continue, he released her hands and stepped back, as if suddenly aware of their proximity. "You should rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Rachel nodded, disappointed by the broken connection but understanding his caution. "Will you stay?" "At the ranch, I mean, just until we know more." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "I'll bunk in the hands' quarters." "Thank you," Rachel said softly, "for everything." As Owen left to make arrangements, Rachel moved to the window, gazing out at the land that had cost her brother his life. If Harrington thought she would flee in terror at this new development, he was sorely mistaken. Instead, it only strengthened her resolve to make the double thrive and to see justice done, whatever the cost. The exhumation took place the following morning, a grim procedure that Rachel chose not to witness. Instead, she waited at the ranch, going through Robert's personal papers once again, looking for any clue that he might have suspected danger. She found nothing specific, but several journal entries mentioned increasing tensions with Harrington over water rights and a vague reference to evidence that needed to be secured. What evidence? And where had Robert kept it? When Owen returned from town with news that the body had been taken to Cheyenne for examination, Rachel shared her discovery. "He mentions evidence, but doesn't say what it is or where he kept it," she explained, showing Owen the journal. "If he had proof of Harrington's wrongdoing, it could be the reason he was killed." Owen studied the entries, his brow furrowed in concentration. Robert was careful with important papers. He wouldn't have kept something like that just lying around. The safe, Rachel suggested, pointing to the small iron box built into the wall behind Robert's desk. I haven't been able to open it. I don't know the combination. Owen examined the safe thoughtfully. Robert once mentioned his safe was set to a date that mattered to him. Do you know any significant dates in his life? Rachel considered. Our parents' wedding anniversary, perhaps, or the date he acquired the ranch. They tried several combinations without success. Finally, Rachel had an inspiration. Wait, what about April 12, 1861, the start of the Civil War? Owen looked puzzled. Robert served in the Union Army, Rachel explained. He was so proud of his service, he volunteered the day after Fort Sumter was fired upon. Sure enough, the combination 4-12-61 caused the safe's mechanism to click open. Inside were several legal documents, a small bag of gold coins, and a sealed envelope marked "In case of my death, R.A." With trembling hands, Rachel broke the seal and unfolded the papers inside. What she found made her gasp. "It's a map," she said, spreading it on the desk, "of the valley. And look, he's marked several spots along the creek with notes." Owen leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her cheek as he studied the map. "These are test sites for water samples. And here's a letter from the territorial geologist," Rachel said, scanning another document. "It says, oh my God, Owen, it says there's a significant gold deposit under Harrington's north pasture extending onto double a land. The runoff from the spring is carrying trace amounts." Owen's eyes widened. "So that's why Harrington's been so desperate to buy your land." "It's not about the water rights or expanding his herd, it's about gold." And Robert knew, Rachel said, the terrible truth dawning on her. He must have confronted Harrington or threatened to make it public, which gave Harrington motive to silence him permanently, Owen finished grimly. "This is the evidence we need." Rachel gathered the papers carefully. "We need to get these to Marshal Collins immediately." "Not so fast," Owen cautioned. "If Harrington is behind this, he'll have people watching. We need to be strategic." They decided that Owen would take the evidence to Cheyenne the following day, traveling cross-country to avoid main roads where Harrington's men might be watching. Rachel would remain at the ranch with extra hands on alert, maintaining the appearance of normal operations. That evening, as they finalized their plans, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it sheeting rain and spectacular lightning. Rachel stood on the porch, watching the wild display of nature's power, feeling strangely exhilarated by the storm and by the knowledge that they were closing in on her brother's killer. Owen joined her, leaning against the porch railing. "Should clear by morning," he said, nodding toward the storm. "Good traveling weather." Rachel turned to him, suddenly afraid. "Be careful, Owen. If Harrington's suspects we know, I'll be fine," he assured her. "I know every trail and hideout between here and Cheyenne. No one will spot me." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, the strong jawline, the concerned eyes, the mouth that had smiled more often in recent days. In that moment of clarity, Rachel acknowledged to herself what she had been feeling for weeks. "I can't lose you," she said softly, the words nearly lost in a rumble of thunder. "Not after everything." Owen's expression softened as he moved closer. "Rachel," the crack of a rifle shot cut through the storm's rumble. Owen reacted instantly, pulling Rachel to the floor of the porch as a bullet splintered the wood where she had been standing. "Inside," he shouted, covering her body with his as they crawled through the door. "Stay down." Heart pounding, Rachel pressed herself against the wall as Owen drew his revolver and peered cautiously out the window. "Can't see anyone," he muttered. "Storm's giving them good cover." Another shot rang out, shattering the window and sending glass flying. Owen ducked back, a thin line of blood appearing on his cheek where a shard had cut him. "We need to get to better cover," he said, wiping away the blood. "The cellar, it's stone and there's only one way in." Keeping low, they made their way to the kitchen and the trapdoor leading to the root cellar. Owen helped Rachel down the ladder, then followed, pulling the door closed above them. The cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Owen struck a match and lit a lantern hanging from a beam, casting a warm glow over the small space. "Are you hurt?" he asked, examining Rachel with concern. No, I'm fine, she assured him, though her hands were shaking. Just frightened. Who's shooting at us? Harrington's men, most likely, Owen said grimly. Someone must have seen us find the evidence. What do we do now? Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Owen checked his revolver. Wait them out. The hands will have heard the shots. They'll come to investigate. We just need to stay put until help arrives. They sat side by side against the cool stone wall, listening to the muffled sounds of the storm above. Despite the danger, Rachel was acutely aware of Owen, beside her, the warmth of his arm against hers, the reassuring solidity of his presence. I meant what I said, she said quietly after a few minutes of silence. Before the shooting started, I can't lose you, Owen. In the lantern light, she could see him turn to look at her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Rachel, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I've been fighting this feeling since the day I met you, telling myself you'd go back east eventually, that you belong in a different world. And now, she asked, her heart pounding, now I know better. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. You belong exactly where you choose to be, and I'm hoping you might choose to be with me. Rachel leaned into his touch, all fear forgotten in the warmth of the moment. I already have, she whispered. Owen's eyes darkened as he leaned forward, his intention clear. Rachel closed her eyes as his lips met hers, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His hand cradled her face, thumb stroking her cheek as the kiss deepened, communicating all the feelings they had held back for weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Rachel Adams. Never thought I'd say those words to anyone again, but there it is. Again, Rachel asked, unable to help herself. A shadow crossed his face. Lost my wife and son to fever back in Texas. 10 years ago now, thought that part of me was dead. Rachel's heart ached for his loss. I'm so sorry, Owen. Don't be, he said, brushing his lips against her forehead. Without that pain, I might never have come north, might never have been at that depot the day you arrived. The thought of never meeting him made Rachel's chest tighten. Then I can't regret it either. Because I love you too, Owen Xavier, more than I thought possible. Their second kiss was interrupted by shouts from above and the sound of running feet. Owen pulled away reluctantly. That'll be the hands, he said. Sounds like our attackers have been driven off. He was right. When they cautiously emerged from the cellar, they found Hank and several cowboys securing the house, while others searched the surrounding area for the gunmen. Found tracks heading east, Pete reported. 2 riders moving fast must have been watching the house, saw you looking at those papers. It's time to end this, Owen said, his jaw set with determination. First light, I'm riding for Cheyenne with the evidence. Harrington's gone too far. Rachel nodded, her own resolve matching his. And I'm coming with you. Owen started to protest, but she cut him off. This is my fight too, Owen. My brother, my ranch. We do this together. The look he gave her was full of pride and something deeper, a recognition of her strength and determination that matched his own. Together, then. The journey to Cheyenne was tense but uneventful. They traveled with 4 armed hands as escorts, taking a circuitous route to avoid ambush. When they finally reached the territorial capital and presented Robert's evidence to Marshal Collins, events moved swiftly. The marshal obtained warrants to search Harrington's ranch and offices in town. What they found confirmed their suspicions. Correspondence, indicating Harrington had known about the gold deposit for months and had been systematically acquiring land in the valley to control it. Most damning of all, they discovered a small bottle of arsenic in his desk and records of payment to a man named Silas Jenks, the doctor, who had attended Robert in his final illness and pronounced his death natural. James Harrington was arrested 3 days later, along with Dr. Jenks, who quickly confessed in exchange for leniency. The news sent shockwaves through the territory, especially when the extent of Harrington's planned gold operation became public. William Harrington, horrified by his father's actions, cooperated fully with the authorities. I knew he was ruthless in business, he told Rachel when he came to the Double to apologize in person, but I never imagined he was capable of murder. What will you do now? Rachel asked, genuinely concerned for the young man who seemed so different from his father. William smiled faintly. Start over, sell the ranch, use the money to study architecture back east, build something worthwhile instead of destroying it. Rachel wished him well, understanding the courage it took to forge a new path. It was something she knew about firsthand. By late June, justice had been served. James Harrington was sentenced to hang for the murder of Robert Adams, while Dr. Jenks received 20 years in the territorial prison. The Double A's water rights were confirmed by the court, and with the truth about the gold deposit now public, the value of Rachel's land increased substantially. But material wealth meant little compared to the other treasures Rachel had found in Wyoming. As summer bloomed across the valley, she embraced her new life with joy and purpose. She hired William Harrington to design an addition to the ranch house, a small music room where she could teach the children from neighboring ranches. She joined the town's school board and church committee, bringing her Eastern education and fresh ideas to the community that had welcomed her. And most precious of all was her relationship with Owen. They took things slowly, both still healing from past losses, both learning to trust in a future together. They rode the range side by side, worked cattle together, and in the evenings, sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. On a perfect July evening, exactly 3 months after Rachel had arrived at Clearwater Springs Depot, Owen asked her to ride with him to the spring where they had first discussed her staying in Wyoming. As they sat beneath the cottonwoods, the sound of water bubbling over rocks a gentle backdrop, he took her hands in his. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he began, his eyes steady on hers. "But I know what I want, and that's a life with you, Rachel. I love your courage, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you sing to the cattle to calm them, and how you stand up to anyone who underestimates you. I love that you chose this hard, beautiful life when you could have gone back to comfort and ease." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as he continued. "I'm asking you to choose again. Choose me not just as your neighbor or your partner, but as your husband. Marry me, Rachel Adams. Build a life with me here in this valley." "Yes," she whispered, her heart too full for more elaborate words. "Yes, Owen, 1,000 times yes." His smile was like the sunrise breaking across the mountains, bright and full of promise. As he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he told her Rachel knew she had found her true home. They were married in the Clearwater Springs church on a golden September day, with half the county in attendance. Rachel wore her mother's lace veil with a new dress of pale blue silk, carrying wildflowers gathered from the ranch meadows. Owen, handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Hank's arm. "I won't let you fall again," he whispered as she joined him at the altar, echoing the first words he'd ever spoken to her. "I'm counting on it," she replied with a smile. As they exchanged vows, Rachel thought of the pale, frightened woman who had stepped off the train 6 months earlier, dizzy with grief and uncertainty. How far she had come since then, finding strength she never knew she possessed, justice for her brother, and love with a man who saw her as she truly was. The Double A and Owen's smaller ranch were combined into a single operation they called the Sunrise Ranch, symbolizing their new beginning. They worked side by side through the changing seasons, weathering drought and blizzard, celebrating good markets and healthy calves, building a life rich in purpose and love. 1 year after their wedding, Rachel gave birth to their first child, a son they named Robert Owen Xavier, in honor of the brother whose legacy had brought them together. As Rachel rocked their infant son on the porch where she and Owen had shared their first kiss, she watched her husband returning from the range, tall and strong against the setting sun. "Your papa's home," she murmured to the baby. "The man who caught me when I was falling in more ways than he knew." Owen dismounted and bounded up the steps, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife and son. He kissed Rachel tenderly, then took the baby in his strong, gentle hands. "How are my 2 favorite people?" he asked, settling beside Rachel on the porch swing. "Perfect now that you're home," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in contented silence, watching the stars appear one by one above their valley. Rachel thought of the long journey that had brought her here, not just the physical distance from Boston to Wyoming, but the emotional path from grief to joy, from fear to courage, from loneliness to love. "Any regrets?" Owen asked softly, seeming to read her thoughts as he often did. Rachel smiled up at him, her heart full. "Not one. This is exactly where I'm meant to be." And as his arm tightened around her shoulders, Rachel knew it was true. She had fallen at a dusty depot in a frontier town, and in catching her, Owen Xavier had changed her life forever. Together, they had built something stronger and more precious than either could have created alone, a love as vast as the Wyoming sky and as enduring as the mountains that watched over their home.